I had a jacket on the office and took it off. So all the air conditioning. It basically releases engaged people because
That's partly why we're here. Yeah, so to see what the technology is doing and how we can be a part of that. Because we need to make sure that that we integrate. That's part of what a DEC does, is practice and shortens that gap that's like 17 years. Technology's gap, I'm sure, is a lot shorter, so but we need to keep on with it so that we are part of that.
No, I mean, I'm going to go probably.
Right? That's the same here.
Yeah.
There was like really fascinating people on this fireside today.
Remind me your name. I'm Gary. I mean, you mentioned those.
How are you doing?
You look crazy for a second.
Is that a recent? Yeah, I had to be.
No.
Okay, I think we're doing like, late. Maybe the day before we can do this. Yeah.
Sure.
Wow, a lot of new faces. I love it.
Cool, welcome to Capital Factory, everybody. Just in case you're not in the right place, this is the HealthTech panel, Future of Healthcare. If none of you have signed up, or if some of you have signed up, we have HealthTech Epic Office Hours right after this event, and it's going to be these panelists right here, and then a slew of other regional influencers, investors, HealthTech mentors, and advisors. And we're going to do kind of a speed dating lightning round mentor sessions with all these people, so you're more than welcome to join. It's from 1 p.m. to 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. in the back there. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator, Wendy Smith. She is Capital Factory's new Director of Health. Really, really blessed to have her. She is also Capital Factory partner, mentor, investor, and new CEO of Wendy Smith and Associates Healthcare Consulting. Really, really prominent member in the HealthTech community here. Super lucky to have her. She has served as a healthcare executive for over 25 years, broad and deep experience in healthcare management for large players, startups, and plans in need of turnarounds. Great lady. I've met very few people who are as passionate about the HealthTech community and helping startups just like yourselves. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to her, and you can take this off.
Thanks everybody for being here. We've got some. Thanks, Arish.
We've got some seats in the front. If anybody still wants to come and sit, I know front row seating is never the
Who are they
preference,
reserved
but
for?
I think we can.
They
move
say
the
reserved, but
For you.
it means for you.
So I was just in Dallas all week at the Texas Association of Health Plan Conference, and as you can imagine, the health plans are kind of reeling right now, going, oh my gosh, the election was a little bit of a stunner, we didn't anticipate this, and now what's going to happen with the Affordable Care Act? What's going to happen with MACRA? Are we going to repeal and replace ACA, or are we going to scrap MACRA? What's really on board? And obviously it's still early to know that answer, but many people spent a lot of hours over drinks pontificating about that over the last 3 days in Dallas. So with that, I really appreciate the panel being here, and really these are three of the key components. Seton is not present today, but you know these folks are really leading the path and helping healthcare tech innovate and have a space to innovate for the future in Central Texas. So I really want to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their organizations, and a little bit about what's going on in their organizations right now. So I'll start with Ray.
Okay, sounds good. Suffice to say that I used to, when I was a young person, work for the Air Force Research Labs with a lot of things that we called advanced sensors and bugs and drugs and things that had to do with initiatives for like little robots and different types of things, okay, millimeter wavelength guns. So that gave me a great appreciation to be able to interact with a lot of what I call the SMEs, subject matter experts, to be able, like you, to be able to look at how do you take something that potentially has dual use and then be able to utilize it in a different capacity. And then from there, it went with UT Austin here. I was in their commercialization, but one of the things that I found that I really, really loved was the software and the devices, but with physicians. So I built a network to be able to make sure that I could then represent some of their intellectual property, as well as then innovations to be able to have what you call physician validation, and then obviously your industry validation. And from there, I then went to Ohio State, and was the executive director of all their commercialization, 16 colleges, dentistry, optometry, medicine, name it, right? You know, they had all that. And when I hit the ground, we had a staff of 42, and the whole thing was to be able to triage through go, no go. Was to be able to identify different types of competitive analyses. Is it a me too? Is it incremental? Is it sustainable? Or is it transformative? Or is it a platform that you don't even know what to do with it, but it's a platform, right? And so all these different types of things to be able to look at. And then the whole thing was to be able to spend about $3.5–4 million a year on patent budgets and about 45 law firms to be able to understand how do we drive those things to be able to gain traction. We developed things like what were called first customer programs, because you need to be able to have, if you're a startup, you got to be able to have who's your first customer. So we needed to be able to create a technology review board with significant advisors from around the country to be able to make those things happen. And those were our friendlies. And we would go to them and say, look, we really think we have something here. It meets all these different, competitive analysis, blah, 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 everything else. The financial model makes sense. And so we would look at a lot of those types of things. And then I got recruited to St. David's on the neuro side of the house, but it was more on the research capacity. Recently, we had, let's just say, 4 of our high volume, I'm leaning over here, but 4 of our high volume surgeons in the neuro side go over to a hospital that's now part of another hospital system that's seated next to me here. So suffice it to say, they just gave me a nice package and eliminated, they're eliminating this particular division, so now they'll look at refocusing. In the interim, what I've been doing is working with several of the physicians on startups. Just met an old friend back here in the back of the room, and I need to be able to have an IoT type of initiative to be able to make a device smart that some cardiovascular surgeons are doing here in town. So those are just examples of the types of things. And I get really jazzed about being able to understand, how do we make money with this? What's the difference that it's really going to make in people's lives? Is it really a me too, or what's that competitive advantage? And I really, really love being able to figure out, how do we scale these things, right? We had a $500,000, $5 million, and an $80 million fund that we had put together. And so one of the things was being able to always look at those. I currently look at doing sourcing for, it's more on the software side, it's a $1 billion fund called the Ventures. So I do a lot of sourcing for them as well, and petting deals.
Great, thank you, Rick. Thomas?
Tom Bowenwright, I'm here with the Baylor Scott and White, who you may know. And my passion is stealing surgeons from the competition.
He's good.
So my role at Baylor is around digital innovation for them, and so our team is kind of structured as a kind of twofold. One is like an internal VC, where we're out meeting, many guys like you, trying to find like the next best sort of technologies to introduce into our healthcare system. And a lot of that is around working with our business leaders to really understand the problems, and then to go back and find and source the best in breed solutions. And then the second piece is really around the commercialization of those products. And typically, health systems are just not really set up to adopt new technologies. I mean, we're, by and large, doctors, nurses, clinicians, we're not high-tech folks. And so we're trying to bring that skill set into Baylor Scott and White through this team. And I've only been in the role for about 6 weeks, but it's been a really interesting ride so far. My kind of career before Baylor was pretty meandering. I think the one common theme was a real passion for innovation. And I've been on the kind of startup side with fairly mixed success. And then went into consulting with McKinsey, did a lot of work around the ACA and payment innovation. And whilst I was there, I really fell in love with the healthcare world. I have a real passion for solving complicated problems, and I really like the service business. And there's no better industry for finding complicated service problems than the healthcare.
Endless complicated service.
And so, to be able to identify myself as a sort of healthcare innovation guy was quite helpful in kind of refining my resume, and that helped me kind of find my way into overseeing sort of innovation at a big healthcare system. Our system has about 48 hospitals across Texas. It's the second largest system. It's the largest non-for-profit system in the state. We have about 6,000 doctors, and the largest ACO in Texas.
So normally Melly's sitting here moderating these panels, so I'm going to put her on the spot a lot today so that she can help answer this. So Melly, please give us an introduction for the first time of who, what you're doing now, instead of sitting here asking the questions.
Yeah, Melly Price. It's actually really cool. I'm used to seeing a lot of familiar faces, and I am struggling to recognize many in the audience.
So how many of you work for a health-related startup? Okay, how many of you work for a system, a hospital system? Okay, so a lot of startup-related stuff. So I'm helped Josh in the early days of Capital Factory. Been here since the beginning. Most people know me as Front Gate Tickets and a couple other startups. Most people don't know that 2 of my 8 startups were health-related. I did an orthopedic medical billing system with a leading orthopedic surgical organization in Los Angeles called Kerlin Jobe. And I also did an ambulatory surgical center management dashboard system before those were cool. And I'm actually a scientist, so few people in my Capital Factory realm know that I'm actually a biologist by education. And so kind of full cycle in my career after I sold Frontgate was I wanted to move back into something, related to that. Ironically, Wendy, I would consider Wendy a mentor of mine in the health sector, because I'd be like, what the hell is MACRA? And then I met Ray, and Ray really schooled me very early on all things Office of Technology Transfer and Commercialization oriented, because he has such a long history there, which really helped when I moved into my current role, which is Executive Director of Technology Innovation at the new Dell Medical School. And what that really means is the traditional academic medical center makes very little money off of tuition. It's typically, certainly less than 5% or so. And then the rest of the money is made off of these large clinical enterprises that are their fee-for-service enterprises. And the Dell Med School is going to be doing that differently. And so commercialization is a key part of that strategy. And I'm responsible for kind of articulating the strategy and figuring out how do we get from where we are now to where we need to be in the next decade. So I'm applying a lot of my startup experience there, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, it's really, really cool to be here in my Dell Med capacity, and with people who have done it for a long time. So I'm probably the least experienced health industry person, but it's fun because I work in an organization where there's people with decades of experience, and they actually really value the perspective of somebody who's built products in another industry. And so, if you're just an entrepreneur who's like looking for a new market, it should not be a blocker to you that you don't have health specific experience. You can surround yourself with that piece. I'll leave it there.
Okay, so as we talked about the Affordable Care Act and MACRA and value-based pricing, I mean, the general consensus seems to be that the Affordable Care Act will definitely change because there's no way that a Trump presidency will allow Obamacare as a term to continue to exist, for one. And then two, there's some fundamental campaign issues that were brought up in the election that really have to pivot. So a lot of the things structurally seem to be that they'll stay, like kids will be covered till they're 26. There'll be no pre-existing cap or no pre-existing penalty. The lifetime max will not cap out. So some of those fundamental things that all insurance companies and people agreed that on both sides of the aisle that should stay will likely stay. But we think there'll be some changes in the tax and the subsidy areas and things of that nature. So MACRA still really early on, remains to be seen. Everyone agreed also that value-based pricing is definitely here to stay, and that regardless, that we'll start shifting more and more to value-based pricing. So I'm going to pivot a little bit here and ask the panelists about disruption, and also kind of as you've talked internally with your systems, what has been some of that flavor that and even in the last week, what's had to pivot in your own organizations to be changing along those ACA, MACRA, value-based conversations, and what, if anything, from an innovation and technology perspective, do you see that ties into that in your systems? I'll start with Melly. We'll go backwards.
That's a big question. Can you chunk it into a smaller piece?
Yeah. So let me just ask it this way: like, what has been the predominant conversation that has maybe changed or pivoted within the conversation in the last week around what was kind of this path that you're going down that now is kind of a new path? And pepper in any of those terminologies that I mentioned if you can.
Yeah, so Del Med is focused on value-based care. So I think, the 800-pound gorilla that nobody knows if it will stomp on our heads is like, what is the Affordable Care Act going to be gutted or changed in a meaningful way? And I mean, I think generally speaking, and don't quote me on this, but my understanding is that MACRA passed with like almost a 90%
There's no
joint
way it's going back.
joint bipartisan approval. And so, I think our perspective is value-based care is here to stay. It's a great place to begin investing. One of the things I always bring up that's relevant for this audience is that I think the challenge of that is that the timing from, when you're a startup and you're raising money for the next, 3 months, 6 months, maybe 12 months of runway, value-based care as a reimbursement mechanism and as a business model is not within 3, 6, or 12 months. And so, I think with my Del Med hat on, nothing's really changed in terms of our strategy. If anything, I think, we feel every day like the work that we're doing has increasing value and increasing necessity. But I think the real question is, how do we start to engage with early stage companies knowing that their time horizon is in conflict with what a value-based horizon looks like? And so my focus is on building programs that can help bridge that gap.
Great.
Help companies that are either with existing fee-for-service offerings start to transition their own products, or what I'd really like to see is some entrepreneurs come to the table with value-based offerings and be able to go the distance, which may be 3, 5, 10 years. You guys probably have a better sense of the time.
Yeah, I might just provide initially just some reflections on political situation. I mean, if we actually look at Trump, he didn't really have a healthcare plan. He had 2 words. It was repeal Obamacare. And then really what he did, he copied and pasted Paul Ryan's plan and just kind of stuck it in. There's some massive challenges that, like, just in terms of how the legislative environment set up, they can't actually repeal Obamacare. And second of all, I don't think they really, when it really gets to it, that they don't really want to. And there's elements of Obamacare that the Republicans really hate, and there is a distaste for that. And there's elements of Obamacare that really aren't working and need to be fixed. But in reality, what we're going to have, I think, is some changes in, just to the underlying structure. A lot of that's going to be in 2 areas. One around the ACA plans themselves, so the direct-to-consumer market, and then secondly around Medicaid.
Can we call it Trumpy care?
Yeah, I think they're just gonna whack a new sticker on it, Trump care, and everybody's gonna be thumbs up, right? So let's think about what are the biggest implications for us on that. I think the biggest one for Texas is around Medicaid block grants. And this actually potentially is going to be really favorable for the provider base. Right now, Texas is one of the few states that has not expanded Medicaid, and it means that we give a lot of charity care up. And so for that part of the population who would qualify under these new block grants, I think that's going to be a real boon for the providers. If you reflect on what the ACA was and the thinking behind it, the ACA was around expanding access to care. MACRA was really around improving affordability. And there was very little actually in the ACA that really talked to the affordability bit. But when it comes to MACRA, as you mentioned, like total bipartisan support, this is the direction. And the train is starting to really gain steam. And if you think about it, to get to value-based care, there's quite a number of things that need to happen. And a lot of it's around like infrastructure, basically getting the right payment models in place, getting the right legal infrastructures. Well, big systems are really kind of working on that. And so now we're getting to that more interesting place where, okay, finally the reimbursements getting there, so doctors actually have to kind of take it seriously. You know, right, when only 5% of your pay is at risk, you're basically acting in a fee-for-service world. And so quite a number of things that we're looking at is really, it's not just about the infrastructure and the legal entity, it's really around how do you change the mindset, how do you change the care delivery models, how do you actually empower this new model of care where the PCP essentially is, you know, in control of managing your total cost of care, and more importantly, actually empowering the consumer to think like a healthcare consumer and behave like a healthcare consumer. And I think that is one of the really, really interesting areas that I haven't seen very much focus on throughout the system. And it's really around how do you change consumer mindsets? And a lot of the thinking is, okay, well, you hit their pocketbooks, right? You whack up the deductibles. That definitely helps certain parts of the, you know, population. There's other parts of the population. If you think of the big consumers in like Medicare Advantage, yeah, we're not going to see a huge amount of change in terms of people's co-pays and stuff there. So what can we really be doing to suddenly get those consumers engaged? I mean, I heard a really interesting, we had a vendor come in with a, best in breed diabetes management solution. And I said, so what kind of participation rates are you getting? And he kept avoiding the question. I was like, no, I'm not, you're not getting away from this. What participation? He turned around and he said, the best participation rates in the entire industry at 30%. It's like, man, there's 70% of diabetics don't actually want to engage in any kind of like diabetes management program. That's kind of shocking. That's a huge opportunity. And so I think it's really interesting, like breaking the code of actually empowering population health from a consumer standpoint. That's what we're getting very interested and excited about.
Thank you. Great.
So I'm going to approach it from a totally different standpoint here from what we're talking about. So St. David's here is part of one of 6 hospitals, 6,000 physicians. We have 4,000 physicians at Ohio State Medical alone. They have 186 hospitals in the United States. They're neophytes in terms of innovation, the stuff that you do. There's over 100 hospitals in the Seton system. They are the nonprofit behemoth, Mayo, Scott and White. But when you look at what's going on, you're waiting for sometimes things to change that are used to doing what they're used to doing, and they do it very well, right? So I look at things from a technological perspective, and I say, if I were to take a bell-shaped curve, and then over here on the bell-shaped curve, I have people that live at home. They go to see their PCP. They're coming up on the curve. They may go to a wellness clinic or what have you. They have an event in their life, and they go to a hospital. And then they're coming down on the other side of the system, and there's the skilled nursing facilities, the SNFs as they call them, and the outpatient and the inpatient rehab, all these different types of things that cascades back down, and hopefully they don't expire, and hopefully they make it back home, and hopefully they're back in the community. That's a bell-shaped curve of continuum of care. Within the continuum of care, my question is, every time I meet somebody, I'm constantly looking at, is it a value-based technology, and where does it play in that continuum? I want to be able to know, does it really help to be able to make an impact on quality care, outcomes, and at a reduced cost or a reduced price? If you come to me and you say, I want you to fund my study, my development, my demo, my whatever, and I can't figure out that first part and where it fits in that value chain cycle, I have a job to be able to do to tell you some things, because the way that things are shifting, you have on the far side of the curve, you have the consumer-centric. In the middle of the curve, you have hospital-centric events, procedures, right? And over here, you have more of the PCP, you have more of the point-of-care type of system. So with that, you have to be able to determine where do you play, and then how do you stack up in that mix? Whether you're a SaaS, a DaaS, or whatever it is type of model, right? And then is it affordable? Because I'll give you an example. If you're in a hospital system and they're really a hospital that's focused on surgeries, and that's the old model, right? Let's just say that's a well-proven model. And to Wendy's point,
Melanie.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'm with
Sorry,
you.
yeah, no.
She is my sister from another mister.
Yeah. You know I love you. So, at Ohio State, with the number of physicians, even with all those number of physicians, because you have 50% research, 50% clinical, maybe 80% research, 20% clinical, the boat doesn't float. You follow me? You can't make ends meet. So you have to be able to rely on grants, you have to rely on value-based types of things that are gonna really make a difference in the long run, to shift the landscape. So I sit there and I think of, okay, so as I'm looking at you, I'm thinking, what do you do? How does it improve quality? How does it reduce costs? How does it do this? And I was gonna give you a quick little example. 60% of hospitals' revenues that do surgeries comes from the OR. And about 33% or more, depending upon efficiencies, comes as a result of expenditures in that OR scenario. If you had a solution, be it a platform, a software, whatever it is, that could help to be able to reduce what I call some of these silo effects across any kind of service line. And service lines have to do with, I've spent a lot of time on the cardiac and the neural side of the house, but others as well, so the endoscopy, everything else. But anyway, so with that, it's being able to figure out, how does your company fit in that ecosystem, and how do you make a difference?
Yeah.
Because then you have to be able to get to different players that are going to assess it from the lens of every Friday morning from 8:30 to 10:30, it's a budget meeting. And the budget meetings are about how to be able to improve efficiencies. And so I look at the whole value-based care, regardless of all the landscape that's going on, and I still say the companies that can end up doing those things that I'm talking about, they will be successful. But part of it is helping to be able to shepherd and get those companies into that pathway to be able to make that happen. Because there's a lot of noise, right? I mean, there's just a lot of noise, and you gotta be able to rise above the noise, so.
Yeah, I agree, and many times I hear in the mentor hours and things, I hear companies say, well, how do I get into Seton? How do I get into St. David's? And so I would kind of echo what Ray was just saying, in that you really, I mean, everyone thinks that they have the greatest idea going. That's why you're in the startup that you're in, that's why you're passionate about that startup. But you have to understand that there's a real budgetary issue that's going on in every health system and hospital system across this country. That's one, and health plans are all about profits and maximizing profits. So you have to think in terms of the business aspects blended with the budgetary realities when you're going after how you get into a system and why you think you've got the best in class idea. So I do want these folks to talk a little bit about what does it look like to get into your system from an innovation standpoint. We're hoping to keep building this health tech segment in Austin, Texas, and we've got a great start, and we've got a lot of great things going, but companies have to survive, and you have to have a place to incubate and innovate in order to survive. So I'd like them to just comment briefly on, what does it take and what do you see happening in those systems, and where are we going from being able to connect with the health systems themselves to get your products to life? Can we start with you, Ray?
Sure, yeah, I mean, we could definitely do a lot better job in Austin. We could definitely do a lot better job, okay? Because you need to be able to have a gatekeeper that is, if you will, the launch pad. We need to be able to have a launch pad system to be able to help, to be able to look at some of those different types of things. Because without having that friendly on the inside, that gatekeeper or a department, and a lot of the hospitals don't have that. I mean, it sounds like these guys do, but I'm saying a lot of hospitals don't, okay? Because they're operators. They're not innovators. Innovation it's a different word when hospitals use the word innovation, okay? It's just very different language. There are some systems that we have around the country that do a very good job at that. But I think we could, in Austin here, do a lot better job of being able to have what I would call that onboarding, launchpad, first customer type of program that, and maybe it's a collaboration or a consortia type of process, but that would be my hope, because otherwise what we'll do is we'll miss out on things that can really be transformative.
So I think a number of systems are starting to move the way that Baylor's kind of looking at and actually creating a sort of center of excellence around digital. Some of the learning curves that we've been hearing from our fellow sort of digital folks in other health systems, and just like reflections, some of those teams have failed abysmally, lost a lot of money, and been shut down. Like Kaiser Permanente just shut down their whole digital team last week.
And that was a huge system, huge endeavor.
I mean, yeah, that's probably the most prestigious health system in America. And they basically said, well, this team was chasing after shiny objects. They were finding cool solutions and then trying to find problems for them. And I think what you're going to find is more and more people, like in teams like mine, is like shifting towards focusing on the problems and then trying to find the solutions to fix them. And so for me, as you're like looking to get into our system, the most critical thing on day one is being able to be very well articulated in what problem are you solving. And actually doing the work to understand and the research around that to be able to say, okay, this is the size of the problem, this is what it's worth in terms of, if you're saving that physician time, and you say, okay, so what type of physician is it? It's PCP. Well, you guys have got 400 PCPs and you're saving half an hour a day. This works out as this much productivity increase that my product can give to you, if that's what it is. So just being able to, articulate like that, then I'm not running around with a hammer looking for a nail. It's like you guys are coming, and if you've got a solution that links back to one of my defined problems, then hey, I mean, we'll be interested in having a conversation. I think the next thing that we get wary of, and so that we kind of look for now, is really this sort of pathway to commercialization. And there really is, like, there's so much technology out there that, one of the big challenges is, somebody coming in and saying, oh, I've got a shiny new piece of technology. And then the onus is on me to kind of work out, okay, how do I actually integrate this with my system from an IT perspective, from a marketing perspective? One of the big things that people miss out on is, okay, so let's just say you integrate this platform, how do you actually get adoption? And I mean, we've made that mistake a few times ourselves, where we spend a bunch of money and a huge amount of time putting together something really cool. It works, it's great, and nobody's using it. It's like, oh, well, we hadn't really thought about, like, who's the target, like, patient audience? How do we reach those guys? And so, to the extent that you can really think through, like, that commercialization process, and it's not like you've gone off into a black box and you've come back with a plan. This is like you're working with, clinicians on the front line, or whoever it is, whoever problem you're trying to solve, that you're engaging those frontline people as thought leaders and solution partners in putting together that. I mean, if it's at a business plan stage, or even better, if you've actually gone and got some initial adoption and got some use cases, and then come back and use those clinicians as your standard bearer, excuse me, and your champion in pushing these through. I'll tell you, because we see so many people coming through our doors, yeah, it makes a big difference if, you know, there's a case study especially if it's one of our clinicians. We had an Austin-based startup come through the other day. It's called a Foundry, and it turned out that actually, some of our post-acute care physicians are actually using their technology and had a fabulous experience. Well, it took an hour to kind of get this information out of them. Luckily, we were patient. But can you imagine? It's like they just brought in that physician, and in 5 minutes, it's like, okay, we're interested. You got 66% efficiency improvement. Bam. So, kind of thinking tactically around how do you align key stakeholders into your into how you market and outreach and actually become part of your business plan. I think that's an important consideration.
Thank you.
Well, we don't have a clinical enterprise. That green Tyvek on the corner is our clinical enterprise. It should be open mid-summer next year. I would probably echo a bunch of things that have been said here. I think it's important for startups to have context that in the first 4 weeks I was on the job, I had 150, it was actually like 138, startups email me to want to have lunch with me.
Wow.
So, there's 22,000 health tech startups, más o menos. And so, I think it's important that you have that context. The answer to getting yourself in is not to go find 8 people within the same system and hammer them all. Because believe it or not, as disorganized as systems are, we actually do talk. And we've had the experience, at Del Med where there'll be like a clinician who's interested, and it's like, just because you can get that meeting doesn't mean you should take that meeting. Like, you have an opportunity to, because what I've experienced happen is like, the startup's like, I will take any meeting with any person that I can get. And then it comes to me and it's like, well, 8 people, which is 8 hours of clinicians' time, who fully loaded is $500 to $1,000 an hour. So you wasted $8,000 of my resources' time, and you're not even prepared. You're not, so think about taking a step back and actually asking the person who's willing to give you the meeting, what can I do to be prepared? What can I send you in advance so that you can get your colleagues there? Because all of a sudden you're like up-leveling yourself to what they think about, which is don't waste my time. And going in, I make these quick sheets for every company that I actually ask a clinician to meet with. And I'm like, here's who they are, here's how big they are, here's how much runway they have. Because, when you're dealing with big systems, reputational risk is a very real challenge for them. They can't take risk with an unproven technology. And so, when you're a startup, I think it's important to address up front. We have, X amount of runway. We're looking specifically for this. And just putting that on the table and then not wasting time. And to Tom's point, it's like, you should know enough. This is just like not healthcare, this is just in general. It still amazes me how somebody will, it's like, I want to have a coffee with you. And they have no idea what they're going to talk to me about, right? Like, that's so freaking irritating. So like, the people that come to me and are like, hey, here's my thing, and not just like, I have a thing that could be helpful in health, or like, woo, I've got technology, you should see it. It's like, do you even understand my ecosystem? Like, why are you showing me a scheduling software that's a one-to-one relationship between a patient and surgeon. Do you understand value-based care involves multiple clinicians treating the same patient? Like, doing that level of homework and saying, you know, Melly, it looks like Del Med's focused on value-based care. Here's how my product can meet that need. And here's what you should know about me. And I've done my research, and here's actually the 4 people I'd love to see my product. You know, what can I do to be better prepared when I come in? Will go a million miles with me personally, and I suspect I've heard some of my colleagues echo, like, the volume is crushing. And what's funny is we all get like, we all are like, Kaiser Permanente digital health team just got axed. Like, the last thing I want is for my leadership to be like, Melly just runs around chasing little shiny objects. You know, and that's a real risk, because I kind of like chasing shiny objects. You know,
Yeah.
so
Some advice that thank you all for that, and some advice that I always give when companies come to me is treat that meeting, if you get a Melly Price meeting, treat that meeting like it's one and done. That is your sole meeting that you're ever going to get. Be extremely prepared. Go in and try to find out as much about the ecosystem. Ask a lot of other people about that ecosystem before you go and spend an hour with Melly, because one of the things that we are really going to try to do here at the Capital Factory is keep building out mentors that are subject matter experts in healthcare and various different things, from actuarial to CTOs to health plan leaders to hospital system leaders. But, you know, you gotta be respectful of their time, because this is all volunteer when you come here. So really do your diligence and be prepared.
can I add one more thing, because
Yeah,
I think this is
absolutely.
critical. Okay, that is true that a one and done meeting should be your mindset, but what I actually do is I will give people a 10-minute phone call, 15-minute phone call to see if we're aligned before wasting my team's resources. And offering that to me tells me that you understand that. You will absolutely piss me off if I ask my assistant to schedule a 15-minute phone call, and you're like, oh no, I'll wait until you're available for lunch. Like, why should I spend an hour, you know? And that's just the reality of it. But I actually think that's a really effective thing that here at Capital Factory we could lead. You know, and you say 10 minutes, we'll see if we're aligned, and then we'll have the data we need to make the next meeting really effective.
Absolutely.
Or we spend time after a meeting with a company, and we're texting each other saying, so here's the skinny. Pre-revenue, pre-this, small fragmented market size, bottom line, risk are, I mean, it's just to speak, right?
I got one more thing.
Okay.
Sorry.
One more.
One more thing. So the other thing is that, you know, these big systems, they have major integration components that have to be taken into consideration. One of the differentiators for us is we are a small hospital. We're just over 200 beds. And we are really purposefully trying to build an ecosystem where we can be, we say that we want to be an engine for the transformation. So having Del Med as a client is not going to assure you get into Seton or Ascension, and it's not going to do anything other than to give you some clinical or evidence-based, even if it's not clinical evidence, that your product works. That's our value. And doing that with us before you go to this guy, like when he walks in the room, you go, wow, I've had a small, you know, a few small or another client makes a huge, huge difference. I mean, it's a little bit beating your head against the wall to try to sell into Ascension wholeheartedly when you don't even have a single facility as a client.
True.
You know, that's a big ocean to boil.
So join me in thanking the panel, and we're going to open up for questions.
All right.
So, anyone have a question?
I do. There's 22,000 healthcare startups all trying to pitch something. But where are the providers saying, here's a problem I want solved? And what if a provider came out and said, here's my top 10 things I want to solve, bring me something that hits there? Because people are just guessing. Hey, how about this? No, we're not interested. How about this? We're not interested. But what are you really looking for? Like if you're saying, what are your top 5 things you're trying to fix?
We actually publish, Texas Health Catalyst is the UT program that publishes our problem statements specific to our IPUs. Right now we only have 3 functional up and running. Well, they're not even fully up and running because we don't have a clinical organization. But the Texas Health Catalyst cycle, like if you go to the website, you can download an RFP and it's like, here are the problems we're trying to solve in women's health. Here are the problems we're trying to solve in musculoskeletal. And that will be the way, we're a state organization associated with universities, so we have to be very formal about how we solicit for that. But Texas Health Catalyst is the best way for that for us. And then just earlier this week, we launched the Health Impact Collaborative, which is my program, and that'll be a monthly, if not several times a month, organization. It'll be a combination of featured speakers and sessions and whatnot. But if you want to get involved in that, unfortunately, the best way is probably to email me. I probably won't email you back, but I will at least have your name to go on the Health Impact Collaborative list. And we're going to use that as a way to get our point of view out about certain priorities. Like right now, we're about to announce a major neuro institute, and we're very focused on aging in place and helping disabled community stay at home longer if their desires to stay at home longer. Great intersection with technology. Doesn't necessarily have to touch the patient, which means you don't have to necessarily go through, the clinical trial process. So that'll be like our forum for the non-patient direct type stuff, and then Texas Health Catalyst will be the more specific piece. And Texas Health Catalyst does have a research component to it. So that being said, I think it's important for startups to leverage research to fortify the intellectual property of their companies.
We just had an event, it was a blockchain event a couple of weeks back, and a 400 physician group here in town, their senior management put together for me, and they were presenting, I was doing the moderation, but it was a list of their top 10 challenges. And so, well, we had spent several times being able to iterate through and to hone it down into, different types of problem statements that they see and pull on. But yeah.
Can we get that list?
Yeah, can you tell us what are some of them?
Well, like obviously one of the challenges is right patient at the right time at the right place. Do you divert a patient that goes to the hospital? If so, which hospital? How does that mechanism work? How do you get them back to the PCP? How is the PCP, who is the quarterback, notified where the patient went?
Yeah.
Right, and things of that sort. So
Thank you.
very pragmatic.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Just kind of follow up on that is kudos to you, Millie, for putting that together. But is that Austin's forum for, is Baylor Scott and White going to get involved and say these are my problems? Because as a healthcare architect, I can tell you the big picture stuff, but I don't care about population health. I care about the transition from MSP to MA. To add value within your ACO organization, for example. And it's I'm frustrated as an entrepreneur that we're not doing more in Austin to cultivate the enormous opportunity we have with the first major medical school built in the last 30 years. Taking an innovative approach. Why aren't we coming together more, and what are those forums that we can engage Baylor Scott and White, that we can engage Ascension, that we can engage CMS, Cedar Park Medical Centers, CMS or CHS. How do we engage those organizations to come to Austin to say these are my problems, work on them?
Yeah, good point. I think, point taken, I'd love to talk with you afterwards about how we start to build out some programs here that do that, and certainly tap into these as well.
Yeah, I might speak to that. It's pretty cool that you're doing that, and I think it's setting a wave here. We are actually creating a little website for our team, and initially the focus was more internal to help many of our 40,000 employees understand how better to engage with the digital office. Then we kind of evolved the thinking a little bit more recently and said, actually until recently, I don't think our company was actually really able to articulate what are the big problems. You had lots of different silos with their big buckets of problems, and so a lot of the exercise I've been on in the last 6 weeks is going silo by silo and actually really trying to vet out what are those problems, and then put a lens on is there a role for digital in addressing that? And as we kind of created, I mean, quite a lot of substance actually behind it. I mean, it's not 10 problems. We're looking probably more like 50 to 100 that we've identified. That we're actually going to look at using this website as a way of, you know, articulating, putting those down, detailing them, and actually using this as an external facing website as a way to attract those solutions.
Yeah.
And actually direct them to the right person as well, because it ain't always me.
So I'm hosting March 9th, I can't remember if it's the 9th or the 10th before South by. Delmed is co-hosting with Providence a summit of digital innovation leaders from major health systems, 40 major health systems, to talk about sort of the major, and it's like the vibe of the summit is transparency, because the issue that you're up against is that these health systems have such extraordinary liability for such low margin return. And so they, you know, they're as competitive as any startup in terms of differentiating themselves. So they have, you know, one is like, I've got all the spine people, and one's like, I got all the heart people, and you know, and then you swap. It's like swingers for hospitals, like you swap groups and stuff like that. And so everybody's looking for their edge, and how do they differentiate, and how do they serve, and what, you know, they're nonprofits and they do a lot of care for the community, so they're looking for where are the gaps in the community. And there is no like interoperability is just a problem in healthcare, but it's not a priority for those systems to get together and say, gosh, you know, we each have the same demographic because there's only so many people in Austin, and they kind of all eventually touch us in some way, shape, or form. And so this group is really thinking about, okay, how do we take what you just said and identify one priority that we're willing to tackle as a consortium. It's invite only, and it's open only to people in systems right now, because that's where we feel the biggest bang for the buck is, and it's not a paid summit. But if that's something that you know, you all would like to participate in, or anybody in the room can somehow align yourself with clients or something like that, and you're interested in coming, let me know, because I think it's going to be very powerful, and we intend to do it with regularity and kind of as open source as we can be, while not disclosing competitive secrets.
Yeah. So I know your inbox is super crazy, so I'm gonna suggest that if you want.
Email Wendy.
To get on, maybe give a card to Arij. Arij, can you kind of wave and give your card to Arij, and we'll consolidate it and get it to Melly so she can get you on the list. I think we're out of time, and we've got Epic Office Hours coming up in about 5 minutes. Really thank everybody for coming. Love suggestions on programs, mentors that you think would be viable, and let's thank these folks again for their time.
You're sticking around
For about 25 minutes, I got to jump on the call. I didn't realize that there was stuff afterwards, but
yeah.
should I just give you my
Sure.
The
only one I have is insurance.
Send me
I work with Tom.
Okay.
Susan Dawson.
Melly,
She's based here, so
are you up the road?
no, I'm not. But very interesting. Like, I think what we're seeing is so many of these systems are actually quite willing to share a lot of insights. Providence.
At our level, they are.
And there's only a few pioneers pioneering Providence as the amount. So we find that we learn way more by spending an hour with them than we do an hour with them.
Where did you come from before?
I was at the Trinity, and then I was at the Adeptus outpatient.
Did you work with Shirley Grundy at McKinsey?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, she's on my team now.
Oh,
She's here in
I met
Austin.
Shonda when I
Yeah, she's amazing.
I just met her.
Yeah, one of the nicest people ever.
Cool.
between our system and Jefferson.
So you're based here, and what is your role?
I am the team subject matter expert, if you will, on design, innovation.
Are you going to mentor?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
I was like, my background, I was in Gravity Tank in Chicago, and they're like an IDEO.
Yeah.
I was a partner there. Just been doing all kinds of innovation, design thinking based. Found my way home around Memorial Day, and
2 weeks in.
So how big is your group? Like, I know
We have
that,
15 people.
did you inherit a group, or have you already built 15? You
No, we
inherited.
inherited about 13, adding a couple more.
Yeah, I actually don't know what to make of Kaiser's decision.
I'm really excited.
It's an interesting.
I mean, I tell you, it would have happened to our team if we have course corrected. Patients probably pretty dry. You're taking a big portion of their capital. Folks are like, how much do you reduce the cost of capital? And if you don't answer that question in the real affirmative, this much impact. I mean, what they're doing, they're starting another team, but they're saying this time it's
Different skill set.
it's being governed by the business unit's leaders. So you've got to work on problems that we tell you to work on rather than like just give you carte blanche to go off.
That's actually so consistent with like packaged goods companies and stuff, right? Like they go wall off innovation for a while, it doesn't work, they bring it back. Yeah, so it's really cool.
It's the old, what is innovation?
Yeah.
Okay, we gotta go.
Something you asked. Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow.
What was the other one? Oh, okay, great.
I mentored with NSFI Core Medical Technology Mission, and also
Are you on the Catalyst? Yeah, I'm actually. I'm in the process of figuring out how to bring an advisory committee into the collaborative.
You must have something else in your program.
And I don't know what that is, but having the biggest gap I have is expertise providing yeah, because that, you know, there's not a philosophy. We don't have a robust Wendy and I are really passionate about figuring out how to handle that, either through the work of the Delmet program or something like that.
I love this place. Anything I can do to help out.
Awesome.
It's just fun.
Thanks for saying that.
Hey,
Thanks for
pleasure.
Thank you. I need all of that.
Currently, I also introduce myself, JD Donovan. Heard a lot about you from jobs, so I know you do jobs since previous life. I just moved to Austin. So I'm really in touch with some stuff. No, I haven't yet, because I know you're a real estate person. I'm actually, my startup's based out of Houston, I'm also out of Houston. That is the real startups. It's called Dr. So it's basically a long design platform. Right now, better for
organization.
it's up to them.
So we make the application, they in turn make
We have to do, like, we just go over there, is that?
so they can amplify more
That'd be
care
great. We'll have to connect.
addressing the behavioral.
Well, yeah, we'll reach out. I was hoping to still get some time with you, but I think you're really busy. Is there?
Yeah, just email, I'll have my assistant, schedule a call.
That'll be lovely.
We'll
Thank you.
figure out.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I'd like to be able to resolve some of the especially in these next interaction as well needs to happen. So, population ranging from depression, bipolar, schizophrenic, secondary diseases of substance use, as well as
Program, or is it something?
Don't look out the window at the floor. I just did.